Roy Bennett pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridors of Gateway Station. It was 2 a.m. and the place was dead quiet. Just him, the hum of air recyclers, and about 6 hours of mopping ahead. He liked the night shift. Nobody bothered him. Nobody looked through him like he was furniture. Just honest work in his thoughts. The food court was his last stop before break. Roy emptied the trash bins one by one, the same routine he'd done for 12 years. Minimum wage, no benefits, but it paid the rent on his closet-sized apartment back in Detroit. He was hauling a bag toward the dumpster when he heard it. A tiny whimper. Like a kitten almost. Roy froze. The sound came again from behind the industrial waste containers. He should have kept walking. Getting involved in weird situations on Gateway Station usually meant trouble. The place was crawling with dozens of alien species, all with their own rules and customs. Station security had made it clear to workers like him, keep your head down, do your job, go home. But that sound. That scared, pitiful sound. Roy set down the trash bag and peeked behind the dumpsters. His breath caught. A child sat huddled against the wall. But not a human child. The kid's skin glowed faintly silver in the dim light, like moonlight on water. Big eyes, way too big for the small face, stared up at him filled with pure terror. The child couldn't have been more than waist-high, wearing tattered clothes that might have once been nice but were now filthy and torn. The kid was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, Roy couldn't tell. Probably both. Oh hell, Roy muttered. He glanced around the empty food court. Nobody. Just him and this terrified alien child at 2 a.m. The kid pressed harder against the wall, trying to become invisible. Roy crouched down slowly, keeping his distance. Hey there, little one. I'm not gonna hurt you. He kept his voice soft, the same tone he'd used years ago when his daughter was small. Before the divorce. Before he lost everything. The child's eyes tracked his every movement but didn't run. You hungry? Roy asked. Those big eyes went even wider. The kid nodded once, desperately. Roy's heart broke a little. He recognized that look. Pure starvation. He'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times when he was young and broke. He sat down on the cold floor, making himself less threatening. Slowly he reached into his lunch bag and pulled out his dinner. A turkey sandwich. Nothing fancy, just gas station meat and bread. But he also had a thermos of vegetable soup his neighbor had given him. Here. Roy unwrapped the sandwich and held it out. The child stared at the food like it was made of gold. Tiny hands, 3 fingers, Roy noticed, reached out tentatively. Then the kid snatched the sandwich and devoured it in seconds. Not eating. Inhaling it. Whoa, slow down. You'll make yourself sick. Roy unscrewed the thermos cap and poured some soup. Steam rose in the cool air. Careful, it's hot. The child took the cup with both hands and slurped the soup. A sound of pure relief escaped those tiny lips. Roy watched the kid eat and felt something shift in his chest. Whatever this child was, wherever they came from, they'd been abandoned here. Scared and starving. How long had they been hiding behind these dumpsters? I'm Roy, he said quietly. Can you understand me? The child looked up from the empty soup cup and nodded. Can you talk? A hesitation. Then a tiny shake of the head. Roy noticed markings on the kid's forehead, intricate patterns that looked almost like tattoos. Probably some cultural thing. Every alien species had their traditions. Okay. Can't leave you out here. Roy pulled off his jacket. The station was climate-controlled, but it still got chilly at night. He draped it over the child's small shoulders. The jacket practically swallowed the kid whole. A sound came from the child. Not words, but something like a purr of gratitude. Come on. Roy stood and gestured. I've got a maintenance closet. It's warmer there. Got a space heater and everything. The child stood on wobbly legs, clutching Roy's jacket like a security blanket. They were so thin. Bones showing through that strange silver skin. Roy led the way to his supply closet, checking over his shoulder to make sure nobody saw them. The child followed silently, bare feet making no sound on the metal floor. Inside the closet, Roy cleared a spot behind some boxes and turned on the space heater. The child immediately curled up next to it, soaking in the warmth. You stay here tonight, Roy said. Tomorrow I'll figure out what to do. Maybe find someone who knows your species. Get you back to your family. The child's eyes filled with something that looked like tears. But they nodded and pulled Roy's jacket tighter. Roy should have reported this. Should have called station security. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of being hungry and alone himself once. Maybe it was the dad instinct he thought he'd lost. Or maybe it was just basic human decency. Get some rest, kid. I'll bring more food tomorrow. For the next 6 nights, Roy brought double portions of food. The child stayed hidden in his closet during the day, somehow knowing to be quiet when other workers were around. At night, when Roy arrived for his shift, those big eyes would light up with recognition and something like joy. The kid learned fast, started understanding more English, responded to simple questions with nods or head shakes. Even tried to help Roy clean sometimes, picking up small pieces of trash with those three-fingered hands. Roy started thinking of the child as Spark, because of that faint glow. He didn't know if Spark was a boy or girl or something else entirely. Didn't really matter. On the 7th night, Roy brought chicken noodle soup and crackers. Spark's favorite so far. The child ate slowly this time, no longer starving. When finished, Spark looked up at Roy with those impossibly large eyes and spoke for the first time. The voice was soft, musical, but the English was clear. "Thank you, Roy. They come soon. Do not fear." Roy blinked in surprise. "You can talk? Who's coming?" "Spark what?" But the child was already moving toward the ventilation grate. With surprising strength, Spark pulled it open and looked back one last time. "You are a good person, Roy Bennett. You saved me. I do not forget." Then Spark disappeared into the ventilation shaft, and Roy was left alone in his supply closet, wondering what the hell just happened. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours, his entire life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Roy showed up for his shift the next night and knew immediately something was wrong. Gateway Station was never quiet. Even at midnight, there were traders arguing, cargo haulers cursing, the constant background noise of a place where 50 different species conducted business. But tonight? Dead silence. Every entrance to the station was sealed. Armed guards in station security uniforms stood at intersections, faces tense. And through the massive viewing windows that lined the main corridors, Roy could see why. Warships. Dozens of them. They surrounded Gateway Station like wolves circling prey. Each ship was massive, painted deep crimson with gold markings that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness of space. Roy had worked here long enough to recognize the banner they flew. The Darvan Empire. One of the 3 major powers in the galaxy. 40,000 star systems under their control. Trillions of citizens. And their entire fleet was apparently here at this backwater trading station, blocking every exit. "What the hell is going on?" Roy muttered. A maintenance worker he knew, a guy named Phil, rushed past looking panicked. "They're searching for someone. Going through every corridor. Scanning every face. Nobody's allowed to leave." Roy's stomach dropped. Spark. It had to be about Spark. He tried to make himself invisible, keeping his head down as he pushed his cleaning cart toward his supply closet. Maybe he could hide there until this blew over. Maybe they'd finish their search and leave and never know he'd helped that kid. He made it about 50 feet. 6 soldiers appeared from nowhere, surrounding him so fast he didn't have time to react. But these weren't station security. These were Darvan soldiers, and Roy had never seen anything like them. They stood 7 feet tall, covered head to toe in armor that looked like it cost more than Roy would make in 10 lifetimes. The metal was engraved with intricate designs, and each soldier carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. They moved with perfect coordination, a unit that had trained together for years. The lead soldier was a woman, at least Roy thought she was female based on the voice. She removed her helmet, revealing sharp features and eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Roy Bennett. Her voice was calm but carried absolute authority. Citizen of Earth. Employed as a sanitation worker at Gateway Station for 12.3 years. Oh, yes. Roy's voice came out as a squeak. Every other person in the corridor had backed away. They formed a wide circle, watching with mixed expressions of fear and curiosity. Roy felt his face burning with embarrassment and confusion. The soldier did something Roy never expected. She dropped to one knee. Then the other 5 soldiers did the same. Roy looked around wildly, certain they were kneeling for someone behind him. But no. They were kneeling to him. A janitor in a stained uniform holding a mop. "What are you doing?" Roy asked. "Roy Bennett of Earth," the woman said, her voice now carrying a tone of deep respect. "I am Commander Thalera of the Imperial Guard. Emperor Vormanex, ruler of the Darvan Empire, requests your immediate presence. You have rendered aid to Crown Prince Lyrevan, sole heir to the Crimson Throne." Roy's brain stuttered to a halt. Crown Prince? That kid was... Spark was a prince? "You will accompany us to the flagship. The Emperor wishes to speak with you personally." What? No. There's been a mistake. I just found a hungry kid and gave him some soup. That's all. That is precisely why the Emperor requests your presence. 2 soldiers gently took his arms. Not rough, almost respectful, but firm. Roy realized he didn't have a choice in this. They escorted him through the station while everyone stared. Roy had never felt so exposed in his life. People were taking pictures, recording videos, whispering behind their hands. At the docking bay, a shuttle waited. Not a regular transport. This thing looked like a jewel, all polished metal and elegant design. The interior was even worse. Plush seats, soft lighting, and a view screen showing the massive flagship they were approaching. Roy had seen pictures of Darvan Imperial ships, but seeing one in person was different. The thing was a city in space. Weapons bristling from every surface. Armor plating that could probably survive a supernova. And at the center, a section that glowed with that same silver light he'd seen in Spark's skin. The shuttle docked. More soldiers waited, forming an honor guard. They led Roy through corridors that made him feel like he was walking through a palace. Every surface gleamed. Holographic art floated in the air. Other aliens, all wearing expensive-looking clothes, stopped and stared as the dirty janitor was escorted past. Finally they reached a set of massive doors. 20 feet tall, made of some dark metal engraved with scenes of battles and conquests. Commander Thalera turned to Roy. The Emperor waits inside. Show respect but do not be afraid. You are an honored guest. Easy for you to say, Roy muttered. The doors opened silently. The throne room was enormous. Pillars stretched up into darkness. Lights floated like stars. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed carved from a single massive crystal, sat Emperor Vormanix. Roy had seen aliens before. You couldn't work at Gateway Station without getting used to different species. But the Emperor was something else entirely. He was roughly humanoid but taller, broader, his skin that same silver as Spark's but darker, like tarnished metal. He wore armor that seemed alive, shifting and flowing. Power radiated from him, not threatening but undeniable. This was someone who ruled 40,000 worlds and made it look easy. Next to the throne, wearing clean robes and looking healthy and fed, stood Spark. The kid's face lit up when he saw Roy. Friend Roy. Before Roy could process that, Spark ran down the steps and hugged him. Those small arms wrapped around Roy's waist, and despite everything, the warships, the throne room, the literal Emperor watching, Roy hugged back. You okay, kid? Roy asked quietly. Yes. Safe now. Because of you. The Emperor's voice filled the room. Deep, resonant, speaking in a language Roy didn't understand. A small device on Commander Thalera's armor translated instantly. Roy Bennett of Earth. You stand before the Crimson Throne. 7 weeks ago, my son was taken from me by those who sought to end my bloodline. The conspirators were captured, but my son was abandoned, left to die on a station far from home. The Emperor stood. Even from across the room, Roy felt the weight of that gaze. For 7 days, our sensors detected my son's life signature on Gateway Station. But we could not pinpoint his location in your station's vast infrastructure. We feared every hour that he would die before we found him. And then last night he emerged. Federal cared for. Protected. By you. I just gave him some food, Roy said weakly. Anyone would have done the same. No. The Emperor descended the steps, each footfall echoing. Most would have reported him to authorities. Some would have sold information of his location to our enemies. Others would have simply walked away. You asked nothing. Expected nothing. You showed kindness to a suffering child because it was right. The Emperor stopped a few feet from Roy. Up close he was even more imposing. In Darvan culture, such an act creates Korveth. A sacred debt. My empire owes you a debt of honor that cannot be dismissed or ignored. It must be satisfied. Roy swallowed hard. Your Majesty, I don't want anything. Really. I'm just glad the kid's okay. A ripple went through the assembled courtiers. Commander Thalera's eyes widened slightly. The Emperor studied Roy for a long moment. Then to Roy's shock he smiled. You refuse reward. This makes the debt greater still. Roy Bennett, what would you ask of the Darvan Empire? Wealth beyond measure? Political power? We could make you Earth's ambassador, give you influence over your entire world. Roy thought about his tiny apartment. His empty bank account. The bills he juggled every month. But then he thought about his old neighborhood in Detroit. Kids going to bed hungry just like he had as a kid. Families struggling like his had struggled. Could you help people like me? Roy asked. Not give me money. But help the folks who are barely hanging on? The ones working 3 jobs and still can't feed their kids? Give us tools to help ourselves. Technology. Knowledge. Whatever you can share. The throne room went absolutely silent. Roy worried he'd said something wrong. I mean, if that's not allowed, forget I. Roy Bennett, The Emperor's voice was thick with emotion the translator barely captured. You have demonstrated Darvan. The highest virtue in Darvan philosophy. To think of others before yourself. To seek not personal gain but the elevation of your people. The Emperor placed a hand on Roy's shoulder. The touch was gentle despite the obvious strength behind it. Your request is granted. And more besides. The next 3 hours felt like a fever dream. Roy sat in a conference room that was bigger than his entire apartment building, surrounded by Darvan officials who kept looking at him like he was some kind of puzzle they couldn't solve. Holograms floated in the air showing charts and data he barely understood. Translators worked overtime as different advisors argued in languages that sounded like music and grinding metal and whale songs all mixed together. Commander Thalera sat next to Roy, occasionally leaning over to explain what was happening. The Treasury Minister is concerned about economic disruption. The Science Council wants to ensure Earth doesn't misuse advanced technology. The military command worries about strategic implications. She paused. You've caused quite the stir, Roy Bennett. I just asked for some help, Roy said quietly. Didn't mean to start an intergalactic incident. You demonstrated a virtue most species lose as they gain power. The Emperor's advisors don't know what to make of someone who refuses personal wealth. A three-headed alien in elaborate robes was gesturing frantically at a hologram showing Earth. The translator spit out rapid-fire concerns about cultural contamination and technological dependence and developmental timeline disruption. Roy had heard enough. He stood up. Every being in the room went quiet and turned to stare. Look, Roy said, his voice shakier than he wanted. I don't know all the fancy political stuff. But I know what it's like to be hungry. To watch your kid go without because you can't afford both rent and food. To work yourself to the bone and still fall behind. He pointed at the hologram of Earth. That planet down there? It's full of good people who just need a fair shot. I'm not asking you to make us rich or lazy. I'm asking for tools. Knowledge. The same chance you'd give anyone else. One of the Emperor's senior advisors, an elderly Darvan with darker silver skin, spoke up. And if your people become dependent on our aid? If they lose the drive to advance on their own? Then we're not the species you think we are, Roy said. Humans are survivors. We clawed our way up from caves to space stations. Give us agricultural tech and we'll figure out how to make it better. Share medical knowledge and we'll find new applications you never thought of. That's what we do. We adapt. The Emperor, who'd been silent throughout the debate, finally spoke. Roy Bennett speaks truth. The question is not whether humanity deserves aid, but how to provide it without removing their agency. Another hour of discussion followed. Roy's head spun with terms like technology transfer protocols, and cultural liaison frameworks, and phased implementation schedules. Finally, a framework emerged. The Darvan Empire would establish what they called the Corveth Initiative. Not a charity. Not a handout. A partnership. Earth would receive agricultural technology that could end food scarcity within a decade. Medical advances that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries. Educational exchanges where humans could study at Darvan academies while Darvan scholars taught at Earth universities. But the catch, and Roy insisted on this, was that humans would maintain control. The initiative would be administered through a foundation with both human and Darvan oversight. Roy would serve as a director but not the leader. Actual experts would run things. People who understood policy and science and economics. I'm just a janitor, Roy protested. I can't run something this big. You won't run it alone, Commander Thalera assured him. But your voice matters. Your perspective matters. You understand the people this initiative will serve. As the conference finally wrapped up, Prince Lyrevan appeared at the door. The kid had been cleaned up, dressed in robes that probably cost more than Roy would make in his entire life. But those big eyes were the same. Still innocent. Still kind. Friend Roy, Lyrevan said softly. May I speak with you? The officials filed out, leaving Roy alone with the prince and a single guard who stood discreetly by the door. Lyrevan pulled a small crystal from his pocket. It glowed with that same silver light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. This is part of me. My biosignature encoded in crystalline form. It marks you as Velkai, friend of the throne. The prince pressed the crystal into Roy's palm. It was warm and Roy swore he could feel it humming. With this, Lyrevan continued, no Darvan will ever deny you aid. You can go anywhere in the Empire. Speak to anyone. Ask for anything reasonable and it will be granted. This is beyond Corveth. This is personal. Roy looked at the crystal, Then at the kid who'd been hiding behind dumpsters eating his sandwich just a week ago. Your Highness, I don't need special treatment. You saved my life with soup and kindness. Lyra Evans' voice cracked slightly. When I was most afraid. When I thought no one cared. You cared. I will never forget that, Roy Bennett. The kid hugged him again and Roy found his eyes getting wet. He'd lost his own daughter in the divorce years ago. His ex-wife had moved across the country, and he couldn't afford the legal battles or the travel to see her. This hug reminded him of everything he'd lost. You take care of yourself, okay? Roy said roughly. Study hard. Be a good emperor someday. Better than the ones who let kids go hungry. I promise. Commander Thalera escorted Roy back to the shuttle. Before he boarded, she stopped him. The Empire does not give the title Velkai lightly. In 5,000 years of recorded history, fewer than 100 beings have received it. You are the first human. I still don't understand why, Roy said. I just did what anyone should do. That, Thalera said with something like a smile, is precisely why. The shuttle took him back to Gateway Station. Roy walked through the corridors in a daze, still wearing his janitor uniform, still carrying that crystal in his pocket. His supervisor found him at his supply closet. The man looked torn between awe and confusion. Roy, what the hell just happened? The Darvan Empire's flagship was here for you? There are news crews setting up outside. People are calling you the ambassador of humanity. I'm not an ambassador. I'm a janitor who fed a hungry kid. Well, you're famous now. Every news outlet in human space is reporting the story. And there's already people outside demanding to talk to you. Roy groaned. Can I just finish my shift? Are you serious? Roy, you just secured the biggest diplomatic breakthrough in human history. You can't go back to mopping floors. But Roy grabbed his mop anyway. I can tonight. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. He needed the familiar routine. The simple rhythm of cleaning. Something normal to anchor him while his whole world spun out of control. As he mopped the food court, the same spot where he'd found Lyra Evan, Roy thought about what was coming. The attention. The politics. The responsibility. He touched the crystal in his pocket. Still warm. Still pulsing gently. A hungry kid. A shared meal. And now humanity's future had changed forever. Roy wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. But he knew one thing for certain. He'd do it the same way he'd helped that scared child hiding behind the dumpsters. With simple human decency. With kindness, expecting nothing in return. Even if it meant facing down emperors and politicians and people who'd want to use this situation for their own gain. Roy Bennett, 47-year-old janitor from Detroit, was about to become the most important person on Earth. And he still had 4 more hours left on his shift. 2 years later, Roy stood in a community center in South Chicago watching a miracle happen. The building had been a condemned wreck 3 months ago. Now it gleamed with fresh paint and new equipment. Inside, 50 kids from the neighborhood, kids who reminded Roy of himself at that age, were learning advanced mathematics from a Darvan educator whose skin glowed soft silver under the fluorescent lights. Mr. Bennett? A girl about 12 ran up to him, waving a tablet. Look. I solved the quantum equation Dr. Velshera gave us. Roy looked at the screen showing symbols and numbers that might as well have been hieroglyphics. That's great, Ashley. I have no idea what any of that means, but I'm proud of you. She laughed. My mom cried when she saw it. She said she never thought I'd go to college, and now I'm learning stuff that college professors don't even know yet. That was the Corveth Initiative in action. 1,200 facilities like this across Earth. Free education using Darvan methods that made learning faster and easier. Kids who'd been written off by the system were now solving problems that would have baffled scientists a decade ago. But it wasn't just education. Roy's phone buzzed. Another news alert. He'd learned to dread those. KORVH initiative destroys American jobs, screamed the headline. Agricultural workers protest alien technology replacing human labor. Roy sighed. This was the 3rd protest this week. His assistant, a sharp woman named Keisha who actually understood policy and kept Roy from making an idiot of himself, appeared at his elbow. We've got a problem. Senator Walsh is holding another hearing. She's calling you to testify. Again. What's her angle this time? Same as always. Claims we're making Earth dependent on alien charity. Says we're selling out human independence. Keisha pulled up a video on her tablet. Senator Patricia Walsh stood at a podium, her face red with righteous anger. Roy Bennett has made deals with aliens that undermine Earth's sovereignty. We're becoming a client state of the Darvan Empire. Our children are being indoctrinated with alien values. Alien values like math? Roy muttered. How dare we? It's not funny, Roy. She's got support. A lot of it. That was the problem. For every success story like Ashley, there was someone who felt threatened by the changes sweeping Earth. Factory workers whose jobs became obsolete when Darvan manufacturing tech arrived. Pharmaceutical companies losing billions as diseases were cured overnight. Politicians who resented that a janitor, not them, had secured humanity's greatest prize. And then there was Earth First. Roy had seen their protests. Angry crowds waving signs, humans for humanity, and no alien contamination, and Roy Bennett is a traitor. They showed up at initiative facilities harassing staff and students. Some protests turned violent. Last week, someone threw a brick through Roy's apartment window. The note attached read, "Alien lover. You'll pay for selling us out." Station security had insisted he move to a secure location. Roy refused. He wasn't hiding. "The hearing's in 3 days," Keisha said. "We need to prepare your testimony. I'll tell them the truth. Same as always." The truth isn't playing well anymore, Roy. People are scared. Change is happening too fast. You need talking points, statistics, carefully crafted responses. I need to tell them why I did this. 3 days later, Roy sat at a table in front of the Earth Coalition Senate. Cameras broadcast the hearing to billions across the planet. Behind him sat representatives from the Corvette Initiative, scientists, educators, economists. People way smarter than him who understood the numbers and the policy. But Senator Walsh wanted Roy. She stood at her podium like a prosecutor. "Mr. Bennett, in the 2 years since you made your deal with the Darvan Empire, Earth has become increasingly dependent on alien technology. Our agricultural sector has been disrupted. Traditional industries are collapsing. Children are being taught by aliens instead of humans. How do you respond to concerns that you've traded human independence for alien handouts?" Roy leaned into his microphone. "Senator, I grew up in Detroit. My mom worked 3 jobs and we still went hungry most nights. I dropped out of high school to help pay rent. Spent 20 years barely surviving, 1 paycheck from homelessness. That's very moving, but it doesn't answer. I'm getting there." Roy's voice was steady. "I never had a fair shot. Neither did millions of others like me. Not because we were lazy or stupid, but because the system was rigged. The Corvette Initiative isn't charity. It's giving people the tools they need to succeed. Tools provided by aliens," Walsh shot back. "Making us dependent on their goodwill. Those agricultural advances you're complaining about? They've ended food scarcity in 37 nations. Kids who were starving are now fed. That's not dependence. That's progress. Progress that comes at the cost of human jobs. Jobs that paid poverty wages and kept people trapped." Roy's frustration broke through. "Yeah, some industries are disrupted. That happens. But we're training people for new opportunities. Better ones. My job as a janitor was honest work, but nobody should have to choose between rent and food while working full-time." Senator Walsh pulled up a holographic display. "Let's talk about education. Earth First has provided evidence that Darvan teachings contradict human values. They claim your initiative is indoctrinating children." Roy actually laughed. "Indoctrinating them with what? Math? Science? Critical thinking? I've visited 50 initiative schools. You know what I see? Kids learning. Kids excited about learning. Kids who have hope for the first time in their lives. And what happens when the Darvans decide to stop helping? When they withdraw their technology and leave Earth unable to function without them? Then we'll adapt. That's what humans do." Roy stood up, ignoring Keisha's frantic gesture to sit down. "Senator, you want to know the truth? I fed a hungry kid. That's all. I didn't plan any of this. But the Darvans honored that one act of basic human decency in a way that's changing millions of lives. At what cost to our independence? At what cost to ignore it?" Roy shot back. "You talk about independence like it's worth more than human lives. Like pride matters more than children having enough to eat. I call that cowardice dressed up as patriotism." The chamber erupted. Some senators applauded. Others shouted objections. Senator Walsh's face turned purple with rage. Roy sat back down. Keisha buried her face in her hands. "That's going to be clipped and shared everywhere," she whispered. "Good." But the backlash was immediate. Within hours, Earth First staged coordinated protests at initiative facilities across the globe. In New York, protesters broke through security and trashed a medical clinic. 6 people were injured. The violence escalated. Someone firebombed an initiative school in Texas. No one was killed, but the message was clear. Not everyone wanted Darvan help. Roy watched the news coverage from his apartment, that brick still sitting on his table as a reminder. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Death threats. Messages of support. Media requests. Politicians demanding meetings. A knock at his door made him jump. Hand on his shock baton, Roy checked the security camera. Commander Thalera stood in the hallway, in civilian clothes but unmistakably Darvan with her silver skin and 7-foot height. Roy opened the door. Commander. Bit far from home. The Emperor sent me. He's concerned about the violence directed at initiative facilities. And at you personally. She eyed the brick on his table. We can provide better security. A detail of guards. No. Roy, someone threw an explosive device at. I know what they threw. And I know why they're angry. Roy sank into his worn couch. Change is scary. I get that. These people see their world shifting and they don't understand why. They need someone to blame. That doesn't make it acceptable. Never said it was. Roy rubbed his face. But responding with alien soldiers guarding human facilities? That'll make things worse. Prove Walsh's point about dependence. Thalera sat across from him. The initiative is working, Roy. Medical advances have extended human life expectancy by 15 years. Hunger rates dropped 60% globally. Education scores tripled. These are extraordinary achievements. I know. Then why do you look like you've lost? Roy pulled out the crystal pendant Prince Lyrevan had given him. It still pulsed with that gentle light. Because I can't figure out how to make people stop being afraid. The numbers don't matter if folks feel like they're losing control of their own planet. Far above Earth, in diplomatic channels humans weren't privy to, other conversations were happening. The Krithian Collective and the Vorath Dominion watched humanity's advancement with growing alarm. Earth was becoming a Darvan client state, shifting galactic balance. Border incidents increased. Skirmishes between rival powers. Fleets maneuvering into aggressive positions. And Roy Bennett, janitor turned reluctant ambassador, sat in his tiny apartment holding a glowing crystal, wondering if his act of kindness was about to spark something far bigger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Prince Lyrevan, now a teenager learning statecraft. Friend Roy. Storm clouds gather. Stand firm. Kindness is never weakness. Roy wished he believed that right now. The war started on a Tuesday. Roy was teaching a basic reading class at an initiative center in Detroit when every screen in the building suddenly switched to emergency broadcasts. The Krithian Collective had launched simultaneous attacks on 17 Darvan border worlds. Thousands of ships. Millions of soldiers. The largest military offensive in 50 years. The kids in his class stared at the images of distant explosions and burning space stations. A boy named Tommy raised his hand. Mr. Bennett, are we gonna be okay? Roy wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise that Earth was safe, that the war would stay far away from them. But he'd learned not to lie to kids. I don't know, buddy. But we'll figure it out together. Within hours, the Krithian ambassador arrived at Earth's capital with an ultimatum broadcast to every human on the planet. The alien appeared on screens worldwide. Insectoid features, multiple arms, voice translated into every human language. People of Earth. The Darvan Empire has manipulated you. Their generosity is a leash. They have made you dependent, preparing to add your world to their territory. The ambassador's mandibles clicked. The Krithian Collective offers you a choice. Remain neutral in this conflict and receive technology equal to what Darvan has provided. Or support the Empire and face the full might of Krithian military power. The message was clear. Pick a side or else. Earth's government went into emergency session. The Coalition Council, representatives from every major nation, gathered to debate humanity's response. Roy watched the proceedings on his apartment screen, stomach churning. We should accept the Krithian offer, argued the representative from the Pacific Alliance. Why risk our planet for aliens who'll abandon us when convenient? The Darvans have honored every agreement, countered the European Federation delegate. Walking away now makes us look like opportunists. We're 3 generations into space travel, someone else pointed out. Fighting a war between galactic superpowers would be suicide. Senator Walsh seized the moment. She appeared on every news channel, her message carefully crafted to sound reasonable. This war proves what I've warned about. Roy Bennett's deal has made us a target. The only safe path is neutrality. We must think of Earth first. The polls shifted rapidly. 70% of humans supported neutrality within 24 hours. Nobody wanted their planet turned into a battlefield for someone else's war. Roy's phone exploded with messages. Reporters demanding statements. Politicians wanting meetings. Old friends from his janitor days asking what the hell he'd gotten humanity into. Then a private message arrived through secure Darvan channels. Roy had to go to an initiative facility to access it. The encryption was beyond human technology. Emperor Vormanex's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than Roy remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Roy Bennett. Friend of the throne. By now you know of the Crithian attack and their ultimatum to your world. The Emperor paused. I release Earth from Corveth. The sacred debt is satisfied. Your people owe the Darvan Empire nothing. Roy's breath caught. You fed my son when he was hungry and asked nothing in return. That debt has been repaid 1,000 times through the initiative. You are free to choose neutrality without dishonor. The bond between our peoples will not break regardless of your decision. The message ended. Roy sat staring at the blank screen. Commander Thalera, who'd been standing guard, spoke quietly. In 5,000 years of Darvan history, Corveth has never been voluntarily released. The Emperor values your people's safety above tradition. Why? Roy asked. Why let us off the hook? Because he learned from you. That kindness means nothing if it becomes a cage. The news of the Emperor's release spread instantly. Human governments breathed a sigh of relief. They could choose neutrality without breaking a sacred debt. The Coalition Council scheduled an emergency vote for the next day. Roy didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about that scared kid behind the dumpsters. About Ashley solving quantum equations. About Tommy asking if they'd be okay. At dawn, Roy made a decision that would either save humanity or doom it. He requested an emergency address to the Coalition Council. His status as Initiative Director and Friend of the Throne gave him that right, though he'd never used it before. Keisha tried to talk him out of it. Roy, 78% of humans want neutrality. The government's ready to vote for it. Don't make yourself a target. I have to say something. What could you possibly say that'll change anyone's mind? Roy touched the crystal pendant under his shirt. The truth. The coalition chambers were packed. Every representative was present, and billions watched the live broadcast. Roy walked to the speaker's podium in the same janitor uniform he'd worn the night he found Prince Lyre Evan. Some called it a political stunt. Roy just didn't own any fancy suits. 2 years ago, Roy began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, I found a hungry kid and gave him my dinner. That's the whole story. No political calculation. No grand strategy. Just a human being who couldn't walk past a suffering child. He looked around the chamber at the representatives, people with fancy degrees and important titles, people nothing like him. The Darvan Empire honored that one act in ways I never imagined. They gave us tools to end hunger, to cure diseases, to educate our kids. And now, when honoring that debt might cost them Earth's support in war, they released us from obligation. Senator Walsh rose. Which is why we should vote for neutrality. We owe them nothing. You're right, Roy said, and shocked silence fell. We don't owe them anything. The Emperor made that clear. So now we have to decide who we are when there's no debt forcing our hand. He pulled out his tablet and brought up images. Ashley with her quantum equations. A farmer in Kenya whose fields now fed 10,000 people. A mother in Bangladesh holding her child who'd been cured of a disease that would have killed her a year ago. The Crithians offer us technology if we stay neutral. Threaten destruction if we don't. The Darvans offer us nothing except freedom to choose. Roy's voice cracked slightly. 2 years ago, I chose kindness expecting nothing back. That choice changed my life and millions of others. Now we have to choose what kind of species we want to be. Are you seriously suggesting we risk Earth for alien politics? Senator Walsh demanded. I'm suggesting we risk Earth for our own principles. Roy faced her directly. You talk about Earth first like it means something. But what does it mean? Are we Earth first because we're cowards who hide when our friends need us? Or are we Earth first because we're humans, and humans don't abandon people who showed us kindness? The Darvans are not people, someone shouted from the gallery. Prince Lyre Evan was scared and hungry and alone, just like any human kid would have been. His dad honored a debt he didn't have to. That makes them people in every way that matters. The chamber erupted in arguments. Roy pressed on, raising his voice. I'm not saying we should fight. I'm not asking anyone to pick up weapons. But we could offer what we offered before, what humans do best. We could help with humanitarian aid, medical ships, refugee support, be neutral ground for peace talks. Show both sides that there's a path between war and surrender. That's naive, Walsh scoffed. You think humanitarian aid will stop a galactic war? Maybe not. But it's better than cowering and hoping the violence doesn't reach us. 'Cause you know what? If the Crithians win this war, they won't forget that we took their technology and stabbed the Darvons in the back. And if the Darvons win, they'll remember we abandoned them when it mattered. Either way we lose. Roy gripped the podium. 2 years ago I fed a hungry kid because it was the right thing to do. Not the smart thing. Not the safe thing. The right thing. The Darvons taught us that kindness builds stronger bonds than fear. Now they're freeing us because that's who they are. We have to decide who we are. The vote came the next day. It was closer than anyone expected. 52% in favor of Roy's proposal. Not fighting but not hiding either. Humanitarian aid to both sides. Neutral ground for negotiations. Human mediators trained in Darvon philosophy offering a bridge between civilizations. The Crithians were furious. They withdrew their technology offer and issued vague threats. But they didn't attack Earth. Humanity's neutral humanitarian stance gave them no justification. The war raged for 6 more months across dozens of systems. Human medical ships worked in both Darvon and Crithian space, saving lives without picking sides. Human negotiators, including Roy himself, facilitated back-channel communications. Roy's most important meeting happened on a neutral station near the conflict zone. He sat across from a Crithian military commander, a being twice his size with armor covered in scars. "Why does Earth risk Crithian anger?" the commander demanded. "What do you gain from humanitarian interference?" "Nothing," Roy said simply. "That's the point. You make no sense, human. 2 years ago I fed a hungry kid. The kid's father repaid that kindness by helping my entire species. That taught me something. Compassion creates bonds stronger than treaties. You're fighting the Darvons over territory and resources. But what if there's a different way? There is no other way. Only strength matters." Strength didn't save Prince Lyrevan when he was starving behind a dumpster. A turkey sandwich did. That conversation didn't end the war. But it planted seeds. Other meetings followed. Slowly, painfully, a ceasefire framework emerged. The final peace talks happened on Earth, in that same community center in Chicago where Roy had watched Ashley solve quantum equations. Darvon and Crithian negotiators sat across from each other, with humans facilitating. It took 3 weeks but they reached an agreement. On the day the peace treaty was signed, Prince Lyrevan, now 17 and learning to rule, attended the ceremony. He sought out Roy afterward. "Friend Roy, you saved more than my life behind those dumpsters. I just gave you some soup, kid. You saved us from forgetting why civilizations exist. Not to conquer. Not to dominate. To care for each other." Roy looked around at the community center, filled with human kids, Darvon teachers, even a few young Crithian students learning together. "I think we saved each other." 5 years after finding a hungry child, Roy Bennett stood in his old janitor's closet at Gateway Station. He'd kept working 1 shift a week there despite everything. The routine grounded him. A young human couple walked past, their toddler riding on the dad's shoulders. The kid had a Darvon learning tablet, giggling at the holographic shapes. Roy smiled. That kid would grow up in a galaxy where humans weren't newcomers or pawns but bridge builders. Where a janitor's kindness had rippled outward to touch trillions of lives. He pulled out his mop and got to work. Some things never changed. And some things, like the fundamental truth that kindness matters, never should.